I was 600 miles away on a work trip when I opened my phone and watched, through my own security camera, my mother hand a man in a suit a folder of documents inside my house. My brother was standing right beside her, nodding. And my father was at the kitchen table, the same table I had refinished with my own hands, signing something I had never agreed to. Before we get into what happened, if this story speaks to you, take a moment to like and subscribe. And I'd love to know, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back. My name is Olivia. Olivia Morrison. And if you met me before all of this happened, you would have described me as someone who had her act together, quietly, without making a show of it. I was 27 years old, working as a project coordinator for a regional logistics company, and I had done the thing that most people my age were being told was impossible. I had bought a house. Not a huge house. Not a flashy house. A 1,400 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath Craftsman on a wide, tree-lined street in a mid-sized city in Ohio. It needed work when I bought it. The kitchen was a time capsule from 1987, the backyard was mostly dandelions, and there was a bathroom tile situation that I have chosen to leave unspoken, but it was mine. Every down payment dollar, every closing cost, every inspection fee. Mine. I want you to understand what that house meant before I tell you what happened to it, because context matters here. I had been saving for that down payment since I was 23. Not casually, not in the way people say they're saving while still ordering delivery 4 times a week. I mean seriously, spreadsheet monthly targets, automated transfers the day after every paycheck, no vacations for 2 years, packing lunch every single day including my birthday. I drove a car with a cracked dashboard and a driver's side window that only rolled down halfway, and I did not replace it because every extra dollar was going into that account. I did that for 4 years. 4 years of choosing the future over the present every single week, without anyone holding my hand through it or telling me I was doing the right thing. I did it on my own because it was the one thing I had decided at 23 that I was going to do no matter what it cost me in the short term. The house was not just a property. It was proof of something. Proof that I could build a life with my own 2 hands on my own terms without anyone giving me a head start. My family did not have the kind of money that bought head starts anyway. My father, Frank Morrison, worked 26 years in manufacturing management, solid career, decent income, careful with money in some ways and not careful at all in others. He had the particular brand of financial contradictions you find in men of his generation. He clipped grocery coupons and drove 30 minutes out of his way to save 40 cents on gas. But he also bought things on impulse at hardware stores and owned 4 fishing rods he had used a combined total of 9 times. My mother, Patricia, had worked part-time in school administration for most of my childhood, managing the house, managing my father, managing the calendar that kept our family's daily life from falling apart. She was a woman who ran everything while appearing to run nothing, which is a skill I genuinely respect, even now, even after everything. Then there was my brother Derek. 2 years older than me, Derek had always been the one things came easily for, at least on the surface. He was charming in social situations in a way I was not, quick with a joke, comfortable walking into a room, the kind of person who collects friends the way other people collect receipts. My parents adored him with a particular warmth that was different from how they loved me. And growing up I had no precise language for the difference, just a feeling I carried around like a small, consistent weight. Derek was the one my father bragged about at family gatherings, the jobs he'd had, the plans he had, the potential he showed. My accomplishments were noted. Derek's were celebrated. That is not a subtle distinction when you are the one experiencing it. The problem was that Derek's actual life had never quite matched the version my parents told other people. By 31, he had held 7 jobs in 4 different industries. He had moved 4 times, always into something he described as temporary, always staying longer than planned. He owed money to 2 credit cards he was managing minimum payments on, had a car loan that was perpetually 3 months behind, and had borrowed $1,500 from my parents the previous spring that had not been paid back and I suspected would not be. He was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, the same way I was clear about my parents. He was not a villain with a plan. He was a man who had been told his whole life that things would work out for him and had never developed the muscle for making things work himself, because the people who loved him most kept covering the gap before he had to. When you catch every fall, you raise someone who never learns to stick the landing. I had closed on my house in April. By August, I had repainted the entire interior, ripped out the kitchen backsplash and retiled it myself, with YouTube tutorials, a borrowed tile saw, and a level of stubbornness that my neighbor Mr. Caldwell, who checked on my progress regularly and brought me coffee during the process, described as genuinely alarming. I had planted a small herb garden in the backyard. I had sanded and refinished the kitchen table that had come with the house, a heavy oak piece that the previous owners had left behind. I had made it mine in every way a person can make something theirs. I was proud of it in the specific, quiet way you are proud of something that nobody helped you build. In September, my company sent me to Portland, Oregon for a 6-week project. It was a significant assignment. I was leading the coordination on a distribution center expansion, the biggest project I'd been given to date, and I was not going to mess it up. Before I left, I did 2 things. I installed a home security system, 3 cameras, front door, back door, and 1 covering the main living area and kitchen. I'd been meaning to do it since I moved in, and with the house sitting empty for 6 weeks, it felt like the right time. And I gave my parents a spare key. For emergencies. For watering the small potted rosemary on the back porch that I was mildly unreasonably attached to. For peace of mind on both ends. My mother said, of course, don't even worry about it, we'll keep an eye on the place. I thanked her and drove to the airport and did not think twice about it. The first 3 weeks in Portland were all-consuming in the best way. Project was complex and demanding, my team was good, and I was learning things about my own professional capacity that I hadn't known before. I was staying in an extended stay hotel that had exactly the right ratio of functional to comfortable, and I fell into a routine quickly. Early mornings, long work days, dinner with my team maybe twice a week, solo runs along the waterfront on weekends. I checked the security camera app maybe once a week, the same way you check a smoke detector, not because you expect anything, just to confirm that nothing is on fire. The notification that changed everything came on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten back from dinner with 2 colleagues and kicked off my shoes and was sitting on the hotel bed half watching something on my laptop when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the interior camera. I opened it without thinking. It was about 6:30 in the evening Ohio time. And I watched, on a small screen in a Portland hotel room, my mother unlock my front door and walk in, followed by my brother Derek and a man I had never seen before. Early 50s, gray suit, briefcase. Kind of briefcase that belongs to someone who handles paperwork for a living. I sat very still. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. My parents had a key for emergencies. Maybe something had happened, a water leak, a broken window, something that required a professional. I watched the camera feed. The man in the gray suit set his briefcase on my kitchen table, on the table I had sanded and refinished with my own hands, and opened it and took out a folder. My mother stood beside him looking at the folder. Derek walked around the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly at things, the way a person nods when they're assessing a space they're thinking about occupying. And then my father walked in from the back door, which meant he had come through the yard, and he sat down at the kitchen table and the man in the suit slid papers across the table toward him. I called my mother. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my father. Same. Called Derek. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had his phone in his hand, which meant he had seen my name appear and chosen to answer anyway, which told me something about his confidence level in that moment. I said, "Derek, who is that man in my house?" There was a pause, not a surprised pause, not a "what are you talking about" pause. A measured one. He said, "Oh, hey, Liv. It's just someone Dad knows. They needed to use the space for a quick meeting." I said, "A meeting? In my house?" He said, "Yeah, it's nothing. Dad forgot to ask you. You know how he is." I said, "Derek, I'm watching this on my camera right now. That man has paperwork spread across my kitchen table. What is going on?" Another pause. Longer this time. He said, "You should probably talk to Dad." And he hung up. I spent the next hour watching the camera feed with the kind of focused attention I had previously only applied to spreadsheets and project timelines. The man in the suit was there for 45 minutes. My father signed something. My mother signed something. Derek did not sign anything during that visit, but I watched him walk through both rooms visible on camera, open the closet in the hallway, and stand in the kitchen doorway looking out the back window at the yard. At my yard. At my herb garden. With the expression of a man taking inventory. I saved every second of that footage to my phone, downloaded it to my laptop, and backed it up to cloud storage. Then I called my company's HR department, explained that I had a family emergency, and asked about the possibility of finishing the last 3 weeks of the Portland project remotely. They were accommodating about it. I booked a flight home for that Thursday. On the plane, with 2 hours of nothing between me and what was waiting, I had time to think clearly for the first time since I'd seen that notification. I pulled up the camera footage again and watched it one more time, beginning to end, this time not for the shock of it but for the details. The man with the briefcase had handed my father a business card when he arrived. I could see it change hands, though I couldn't read it from the camera angle. The folder he'd brought had multiple documents in it. My father had used a pen from his own shirt pocket to sign, which meant he'd come prepared. Derek had taken out his phone and photographed the backyard at some point. I watched him raise it and frame the shot. None of this was accidental. None of this was casual. This had been planned, organized, and executed in my absence with the specific intention of me not knowing it was happening. That last part is the one that lodged in my chest and stayed there. Not just what they'd done, but the calculation behind it. The deliberate use of my absence. The certainty on their end that I wouldn't find out. What they had not counted on was 3 cameras and a cloud backup. I did not call my parents from the plane. I did not call them when I landed. I took a car home from the airport, dropped my bag in my bedroom, walked through every room of my house, slowly checking, and then I sat down at my kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I looked up real estate attorneys in my city. I had an appointment the next morning. Her name was Sandra Okafor, and she was the kind of lawyer who makes you feel like you've finally arrived at the right place after a long drive. She was direct, thorough, and not remotely surprised by my story, which I realized said something about how common this particular flavor of betrayal actually is. She reviewed the footage I showed her and then explained what she believed had happened. Based on what was visible, the type of document folder, the nature of my father's signature, the involvement of what appeared to be a notary or real estate agent, she believed my parents had been attempting to either add Derek's name to my property deed or initiate some form of quitclaim transfer. Whether they had succeeded depended on what exactly had been signed and whether anything had been filed. We pulled my property records that same morning. Nothing had been filed. Whatever they had signed in my kitchen, it had not yet reached the county recorder's office. Sandra explained that even if they had attempted to file it, a transfer of this nature without my signature and consent would have been fraudulent and legally unenforceable, but catching it before filing meant we were dealing with an attempt, not a completed act. She advised me to document everything, change my locks immediately, and be prepared for the confrontation that was coming. She also told me very calmly that I could pursue legal action against the parties involved if I chose to. I told her I wanted to understand the full picture before I made any decisions. She said that was the right approach. I liked her considerably. I want to say something about the legal conversation because I think people expect that part to be more dramatic than it was. When Sandra Okafor told me that no transfer had been filed, and that what had been attempted would have been legally unenforceable without my signature, and that I had every right to pursue legal action, I felt something complicated. Relief, yes, but also a specific exhaustion at the idea of turning my family into a legal case. I had the footage. I had an attorney's assessment. I had everything I needed to take this as far as it could go. And I made the deliberate choice not because I was afraid of conflict or still trying to protect my parents' feelings, but because I understood sitting in that law office that winning legally and winning in the way that actually mattered to me were two different things. The legal system could protect my property, could not give me what I actually needed, which was for my family to understand what they had done and to face it without a courtroom forcing them to. I wanted truth, not a judgment. That distinction shaped every decision I made from that point forward. I changed my locks that afternoon. All 3 entry points. I didn't call to tell my parents I was back in town. I needed 2 days to process what I was dealing with, to get my footing under me, to decide how I was going to walk into that conversation. 'Cause I already knew I was going to have it. I am not the kind of person who lets a thing this large stay under the surface. I had been raised in a family where difficult things were routinely swept under the carpet and left to fester, and I had spent my adult life deliberately building a different relationship with conflict. Not aggressive, not dramatic, but direct. Honest. If something needed to be said, I was going to say it. The only question was how. I called my parents on a Saturday morning and told them I was back and asked them to come over. I said I had something I needed to discuss. My mother said she thought I wasn't back until the end of the month. I said plans had changed. Her voice did the thing it does when she's recalibrating, a slight uptick in brightness, overcompensating for sudden nervousness. She said of course they'd come Sunday. I said today would be better. There was a pause. She said okay. I called Derek separately and told him to come as well. He said he was busy. I said, Derek, you need to be here. Something in my voice must have communicated that the conversation was already over, because he said he'd be there in an hour. I said fine. While I waited, I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, that table, the one they had sat at, and I pulled up the security footage on the screen. I made coffee because I needed something to do with my hands. My neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, who had the particular gift of appearing at useful moments, knocked on my back door to return a tool he'd borrowed and took one look at my expression and said, "You doing okay, kiddo?" I told him I was handling something. He said if I needed anything, he was 40 feet away. I thanked him and meant it. They arrived within 10 minutes of each other. My parents first, my mother in the camel-colored coat she wore to anything she considered a formal occasion, my father with the slightly closed-off posture he uses when he's prepared to defend himself. Derek came in behind them, hands in his jacket pockets, and he did not meet my eyes right away. I noticed that. I noticed all of it. I had become, in the past 4 days, very attentive. I brought them to the kitchen. I did not offer coffee, which I think they registered. I sat across from them on my side of the table. My laptop was open. The footage was paused on the first frame, the gray-suited man walking in, briefcase in hand, my mother right behind him. I did not speak first. I let them look at the screen. I watched my mother's face, the slow recognition, the color change, the way her eyes moved to my father and then back to the screen. Derek looked at the table. My father looked at me. He said, "Olivia, I want to explain." I said, "I'm going to play the footage first. Then you can explain." I pressed play. I let it run for 4 full minutes. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. I watched all 3 of them watching themselves. My mother put her hand over her mouth at some point. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet gesture that might have been shame or might have been calculation, and I wasn't sure enough in that moment to assign it a definitive meaning. My father sat completely still with his hands flat on the table, the same posture he had when he was reviewing something and deciding on his response. Derek, by the 3rd minute, was looking at the wall to his left. Not the screen. The wall. When the clip ended, I closed the laptop and looked at all 3 of them and said, "Who wants to start?" My father said he could explain. I said I was listening. He said, "And I want you to understand that what followed was not shouting, not accusations, not the big theatrical blow-up you might expect. It was something quieter and in some ways harder to sit with." He said that he and my mother had been worried about Derek. That Derek was in a difficult position financially, that his rental situation was unstable, that they didn't have the resources to help him the way they wanted to. He said they had thought, and here he paused, choosing his words in the way people do when they know the words are going to land badly, that since I was doing well and since I had the house and since Derek needed stability, it might help to have Derek's name on the property. Just as a backup, he said. Not to take anything away from you. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, "You tried to put Derek's name on the deed to my house. A house I bought. With my own money. That I saved for 4 years. Without telling me. While I was 600 miles away. And your explanation is that it would help Derek." My father started to say something. I said, "I'm not finished." I had never said that to my father before in my life. He stopped. I said, "I want to make sure I understand this clearly because I think the details matter. You came into my house with a real estate professional or attorney using a key I gave you for emergencies, and you signed documents intended to alter the ownership of my property without my knowledge or consent. Is that what happened?" My mother said, "Olivia, it wasn't meant to." I said, "Mom, is that what happened?" She went quiet. My father said quietly, "Yes." I said, "I spoke to an attorney. Nothing was filed. But you need to understand that what you attempted is not just a family disagreement. It's fraud. I want you to sit with that word for a second. Fraud. Against your own daughter." The silence in the room had a different quality then. Heavier. I continued, "I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about it legally. What I have decided is that I need to say some things that have needed to be said for a very long time, and I'm going to say them now." I looked at Derek. I said, "Derek, I don't blame you the way I blame them. You have spent your entire life being told that things would be arranged for you, and you believed it because why wouldn't you? It's all you've ever known. But you are 31 years old and you walked through my house like it was already yours, and you took photos of my backyard and you said nothing to me. You chose not to call me. You chose not to warn me. You had that choice and you made it. I need you to know that I see that." Derek looked at the table. His jaw was tight. He didn't speak, and I didn't expect him to yet. I wasn't finished anyway. I looked at my parents. I said, "You have always treated Derek and me differently. I've known that since I was a child. I never made it a thing because I told myself it was just the way families work, that you loved us both and just showed it differently. But what happened in this room 3 weeks ago is not about love. It is about the fact that on some fundamental level you do not see what I have built as fully mine. You see it as a family resource. You see me as a family resource. Something to be allocated where the need is greatest, regardless of what I actually worked for or what I actually want. And you were so comfortable in that assumption that you didn't even think you needed to ask me. I paused. That is the part that broke something in me. Not the attempt itself. The comfort with which you made it. My mother was crying. Quietly, she does not cry loudly. That would require a loss of composure she doesn't allow herself. My father was not crying, but he had aged visibly in the past 10 minutes in the way that people age when a truth they have been outrunning finally catches them. He said, "Olivia, I'm sorry." I studied his face. I believe he meant it. I also knew that sorry in that moment was only the beginning of a much longer reckoning, and I was not going to treat it as the end of one. I said, "I'm not ready to talk about what comes next for us as a family. I need time with this. What I need from all three of you right now is to leave my house and give me that time." Nobody argued. Nobody pushed back. My mother stood up and said my name in a voice that held all the things she couldn't organize into words, and I looked at her and said, "I know, Mom." 'Cause I did know. I knew she loved me. I knew that love had coexisted in her all these years with choices that contradicted it. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I was done pretending the second one didn't exist in order to preserve the comfort of the first. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after. The house was very quiet. Outside I could hear a car go past, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon. I felt wrung out, not destroyed, not victorious. Just emptied in the way you feel after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally setting it down. I had said the true things. They were out now and they couldn't be put back. Whatever came after would have to be built on the actual ground of what had happened, not on the managed version of it. That was the only foundation worth building on. The days following that conversation had a peculiar texture that I've had a hard time naming even in retrospect. The house was the same house it had always been, same walls, same kitchen table, same herb garden out back. But something in my relationship to it had shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Before I'd seen that footage, I had loved this house with the uncomplicated pride of ownership. Through it became something slightly different, not tainted exactly but tested. As if the house had been put in a box and shaken, and I was slowly returning each item to its place and reassessing whether it still belonged. I spent a lot of evenings in those first 2 months simply sitting in different rooms, coffee in hand, re-establishing the quiet understanding between me and the space I'd built. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but a house is not just walls and square footage. It is the accumulated weight of every choice and sacrifice that brought you to it. Having that threatened, even unsuccessfully, requires a kind of emotional repair that nobody tells you is part of the process. I did not speak to my family for 2 months. That decision was not made in anger. It was made in self-preservation, which is a different thing entirely, and I wish someone had explained the distinction to me earlier in my life. Anger wants to punish. Self-preservation wants to protect. I was not interested in punishing my family. I was interested in not being gradually, incrementally hollowed out by proximity to people who did not fully see me. Those are 2 very different motivations, and they lead to 2 very different kinds of silence. Those 2 months were quiet in the way that clarity is quiet. I went back to work. I finished the Portland project from my home office and received a strong performance review for it. I called Sandra Okafor and told her I had decided not to pursue legal action, not because what they'd done was acceptable, but because a lawsuit against my own parents was not the life I wanted to build, and the attempt had failed before it could do lasting damage. Sandra said she understood and told me to call if anything changed. I said I would. I spent weekends working on the house. I finally tackled the bathroom towel situation, which was exactly as bad as I'd remembered, and I replaced the back porch railing that had been wobbling since spring. I planted tulip bulbs in the front yard in October with the full intention of watching them come up in spring and feeling proud about it. My friend Maya, who had known me since college and had the particular talent of showing up with food when things were hard without making a production of it, came over twice a week for the first month and kept me honest about my feelings, about my family, about the difference between processing something and just turning it over and over without letting it go. She also helped me paint the guest room a color we debated about for 45 minutes before landing on a warm terracotta that turned out to be exactly right. Having a good friend in a season like that one is not a small thing. It is, in many ways, the whole thing. I also, during those 2 months, allowed myself to feel the grief of it, and I want to name that separately because I think it's the part people don't talk about enough when they tell these kinds of stories. It is not just anger. The anger gets the spotlight because it's easier to watch, easier to root for. But underneath the anger was grief. Real, specific grief, for the version of my parents I had wanted them to be. For the version of my childhood I had quietly revised in my memory so many times that the revision had almost become the truth. For the ease of a family that simply shows up for you without conditions, the kind of ease I had never quite had and had spent years telling myself I didn't need. I let myself grieve that. Not forever. Not so deeply that I got lost in it. But honestly, in the way that grief requires in order to pass through you instead of setting up permanent residence. My mother texted me at Thanksgiving. Just thinking of you. I stared at the text for a long time. I wrote back, I know. We're not there yet, but I'm working on it. She replied with a single heart. I went to Thanksgiving at Maya's family's house, ate too much sweet potato casserole, and slept better than I had in weeks. One thing I did not fully expect in the months after the confrontation was how much space opened up inside me once I had said the things that needed to be said. I had been carrying an enormous amount of unsaid truth for years, not just about the house incident, but about the years of accumulated inequity that had preceded it. The favoritism I had never named. The celebrations I had never quite received. The steady, quiet sense of being loved less fully than my brother, of being useful where he was cherished. All of that had been sitting in me like stone, and I had been so busy managing around it, being competent, being self-sufficient, being the daughter who didn't need anything, that I hadn't fully understood how much weight I was carrying until I set it down. That confrontation had been the first time in my adult life I had looked my parents in the eyes and told them the truth about what their choices had cost me. Not the watered-down version. Not the version edited for their comfort. The actual truth. And something cracked open in me after that, not painfully but like a window being opened in a room that has been closed too long. I could breathe differently. Move differently. I stopped bracing for things I'd been unconsciously bracing for my entire life. Time, when you're actually using it, moves faster than you expect. A year passed and then most of another. I had been promoted, senior project coordinator, which came with a raise I quietly celebrated alone in my car in the parking garage, which is, I have decided, an entirely valid way to celebrate. I had paid extra on my mortgage every month, chipping away at the principal with the same methodical satisfaction I had once applied to building the down payment. My house was genuinely beautiful now, the kind of house you feel when you walk into it, a specific warmth that is partly good lighting and partly the accumulated presence of a person who has poured care into every surface. Mr. Caldwell told me once that the house looked happy. I thought I understood what he meant. I had also, somewhere in that second year, met someone. His name was Jonah, and he worked in urban planning, and he had the particular quality of being intensely present in conversation that I had learned to identify as genuine rather than performed. We had met through a mutual friend, had coffee that turned into a 3-hour walk along the river, and had been figuring each other out in the careful, honest way I was by now committed to doing everything. He knew about my family situation in broad strokes. I had not made it the centerpiece of what we were building, but I had not hidden it either. He listened without trying to solve it, which is a specific form of respect that I do not take for granted. It was Jonah, actually, who told me about Derek. I had not been following my brother's life closely. I had maintained a minimal civil contact with my parents by then, the kind that involves holiday texts and occasional check-in calls that are carefully surface level, the kind that says we are not estranged but we are also not what we were, or rather, we are not what I had pretended we were. But Derek and I had stayed in our particular kind of truce, not warm, not cold. Just parallel. He had Jonah on a shared social media platform from some years back, and Jonah mentioned one evening that he'd seen Derek post something about looking for a new place to live. Again, I said I'd heard he was having some trouble. Jonah said it looked like more than some. I did some quiet research of my own. Derek had lost his most recent job, a sales role he'd held for 10 months, which was actually one of his longer runs. His rental situation had collapsed. He was 33 years old and had moved back in with my parents temporarily, which was the word everyone was apparently using to describe what had become a pattern with no visible end. And my parents, who were now on the backside of their working years, were feeling the specific financial pressure of supporting an adult child while trying to preserve a retirement that had not been planned with that variable in mind. My father had taken on part-time consulting work after his company had reduced his hours. My mother had retired from her school administration job the previous spring and was now watching the household budget with the tightness of someone who had done the math and didn't love the answer. There is a particular irony that does not escape me in how things eventually unfolded, and I want to be precise about the word irony here because I am not using it in the way of a person who wanted this outcome. I did not want my family to struggle. I had never wanted that. What I had wanted from the very beginning was simply to be seen clearly, to have the people who raised me understand that I had built something real, something earned, and that it deserved the same respect they would have given it if it had belonged to Derek. The irony is that the collapse of the story they had been telling themselves about Derek, the story that had justified everything they'd done, was the thing that finally made that possible. I learned all of this not from them but in fragments, from the occasional conversation with my Aunt Linda, who had always been the family's honest broker and had kept a thread to me throughout everything without making it about sides. She called me one afternoon in March and said, with the directness I'd always appreciated in her, "Olivia, your parents are struggling. I don't know the full story of what happened between you all, and I'm not asking. But I thought you should know." I thanked her for telling me. I sat with it for a few days. Call from my mother came on a Sunday evening. She didn't build up to it and she didn't dress it up in pleasantries, which I actually respected. It told me that she had done some growing of her own in the past 2 years, or at least was trying to. She said things were difficult. That my father's reduced income and Derek's situation and a car repair bill that had hit at exactly the wrong time had put them in a place she described as behind in a way that's getting harder to manage. She said she wasn't calling to ask for anything specific. She said she was calling because she missed me and because she was ashamed of what had happened in my kitchen 2 years ago and because she wanted me to know that without expecting it to fix anything. I listened. I did not rush in to reassure her or to fill the silence with absolution. When she was done, I said I had heard her. I said I needed to think. She said she understood. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called my parents and asked them to come over. Not Derek. My parents. I needed to do this layer first, without an audience. They came on a Wednesday evening. My mother looked older in a way that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with worry, that particular aging that comes from carrying stress over a sustained period. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in the way a person looks when the structure they built their confidence on has shifted under them. He had been, for as long as I could remember, a man who moved through the world with the quiet certainty of someone who knew his place in the hierarchy. That certainty was gone. What was left was just a man, my father, tired and a little lost, sitting at my kitchen table. I had thought carefully about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. I was not there to revisit the footage or relitigate the original confrontation. That had been done. What remained was the question of what we were going to do with the space that had opened up between that night and this one. I started by saying something I had not said explicitly enough in the first conversation. I said, "I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay and not because it didn't hurt me, but because I have spent 2 years doing a lot of work on myself, and one of the things I've learned is that holding on to the weight of what people did to you costs you more than it costs them. So I'm putting it down. That's for me, not for you. But I want you to know it." My mother pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. My father exhaled in a way that suggested he had been carrying something in his chest for 2 years and had just now been given permission to set it down. Then I said the practical part. I said I was willing to help, within reason, with structure, and with full transparency. I could contribute to my mother's medical premium gap they'd mentioned. I could help them look at Derek's situation with a genuine eye toward actual solutions, not temporary patches. But I said very clearly, this is not going to be a relationship where I am a resource that gets managed around. If we move forward, it's as equals. My life, my house, my choices, those are mine. Not the family's. Not Derek's. Mine. If that's understood and respected, then we have something to build on. My father said, "It's understood, Olivia." He said my name the way you say something you've been careful with for a while, carefully, like it matters. I believed him. Not completely and not without reservation, because trust that has been broken is rebuilt slowly and I was not in a hurry. But enough to begin. Derek came over the following weekend, alone, without our parents. He had asked to come, which told me something. I opened the door and he stood on my porch looking like a man who had rehearsed something and was no longer sure it was enough. I said, "Come in." We sat in the living room and he talked for a long time, not excuses, which surprised me. He talked about the pattern he'd recognized in himself only after being forced by circumstance to really look at it. He talked about how easy it had been to go along with what our parents were doing because he'd told himself it was just them being parents, just them helping, and how that story had let him off the hook from looking at his own part in it. He said, "I should have called you, Liv. The second they told me what they were planning, I should have called you." I said, "Yes, you should have." No softening. He nodded. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. I told him what I had told our parents, that I forgave him, that forgiveness was for me, not him, and that what happened next was up to him to define by his actions, not his words. He said he understood that. We had coffee. We talked about other things too, carefully at first and then more naturally, and by the time he left there was something tentative and honest in the air between us that had not been there since we were children. It was not fixed, but it was real, and real is always the better starting point. It has been almost 3 years since that Tuesday night in Portland when a motion notification changed the direction of my life. My house is paid ahead by 18 months on the mortgage. Tulips came up in spring, exactly as planned, and they were exactly as satisfying as I had anticipated. Jonah and I are still carefully, honestly building something. We do not rush things. We are both people who know the cost of building on an unstable foundation, and we take our time with it. My parents and I talk on the phone every 2 or 3 weeks. It is not the relationship we had before. It is something more honest than that, which means in some ways it is better, even if it is quieter. My father asked me once, a few months ago, if I was happy. Just that, out of nowhere, in the middle of a conversation about something else. I said yes. I said genuinely, actually happy, not performing it, not managing toward it, just living it. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Good. That's the thing I should have been protecting all along." It was the most honest thing he has said to me in my entire adult life. I told him it wasn't too late to start. He said he hoped not. I said it wasn't. If I could go back and give the version of me who was sitting in that Portland hotel room something to hold on to in that moment of shock and disbelief, I would tell her, the cameras catching everything is not the lucky part. You are the lucky part. You are the person who, when betrayed by the people who were supposed to be your safe harbor, did not collapse and did not retaliate and did not let the worst thing that happened to you become the defining story of your life. You built something. You protected it. You spoke the truth when it needed to be spoken, and you grieved what needed to be grieved, and you came out on the other side of it with your spine intact and your house yours and your life genuinely, undeniably yours. That is not luck. That is who you are. And no one, no matter how much they love you or how much they fail you, can take that from you unless you let them. Don't let them. Not ever. Build your own thing. Put your name on it. And make absolutely sure you have the receipts. What happened to Olivia is a story about one of the most disorienting kinds of betrayal, the kind that comes wrapped in love. Her parents did not hate her. They loved her in the limited and flawed way they knew how. And yet that love did not stop them from treating her house, her labor, her years of sacrifice as something that belonged to the family's needs rather than to her. The lesson is not simply put up cameras, though honestly that is not the worst advice either. The deeper lesson is this: love without respect is not the same thing as love. A person can love you and still not see you. They can care about your well-being in the abstract while failing in practice to honor what you have actually built. Olivia's power in this story came not from the footage itself, but from knowing, unshakably without anyone's permission, that what she had built was hers. That knowledge was the foundation of every calm word she spoke at that kitchen table. She did not need to scream to be heard. She did not need to break down to prove she was hurt. She stood in the truth of what she had done and what had been done to her, and she let that truth do the work. That is what real power looks like. Not the loudest voice, clearest one. If you are in a family or any relationship where your accomplishments are treated as communal property, where your hard work is quietly redirected toward other people's needs without your input, where your boundaries are considered negotiable, recognize that for what it is. It is not love in its healthiest form. It is love that has not learned to hold you as a separate, sovereign person. And you are allowed to name that. Calmly, clearly, with receipts if you have them. Build your evidence, not to weaponize it, but to ground yourself. When the people around you rewrite what happened, your own records of reality are an act of self-respect. Document what matters. Trust what you know. And when the confrontation comes, because it usually does eventually, speak from the most grounded, quietest version of yourself. Not the wounded one. Not the furious one. The one who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they've built. That version of you is more powerful than any argument, any lawsuit, any raised voice. That version of you is unbeatable. You are not a resource to be allocated. You are a person to be respected. Know the difference. Protect it like it's yours because it is.